What's up, everyone? Pettit Party here. Today we're going to be going over a bit more of the fallout from the $10,000 Cyberstein sale that everyone still likes to keep bitching about. A couple of new developments in that, and I just wanted to go over the concept of the fact that the market doesn't really give a shit what you think or feel. It's independent of any one individual, and some people need to understand how that actually works. So, the way that this whole buying, selling, collecting, trading thing works is that an item is worth what someone is willing to pay and what someone is willing to sell the item for. So, if I'm trying to buy a Blue Eyes White Dragon for $10,000, but the only one available for sale is $20,000, neither one of us wants to budge. The item really doesn't have a specific market value at that point because there's no supply to be purchased at the current asking price, basically. So that's where it gets a bit tricky. The TLDR, though, is if you don't agree with how much someone else is willing to pay for an item, your opinion doesn't really matter, because if someone is willing to spend their own personal or business money on a commodity, item, collectible, whatever you want to call it, then that's their own business. Just because you think they're an idiot and stupid and they don't know what the hell they're at, investing in something like Cyberstein, doesn't mean that you're right. Doesn't mean the other person's right, but the market is always going to dictate the actual price that things sell for. So, in the case of Cyberstein, there this past, few days ago, the individual who bought that particular card from Sassy's auction paid just over $10,000 for it. And that person is finding it so hilarious that everyone in the Yu-Gi-Oh community is getting bent up over a only $10,000 card, because in the grand scheme of things, $10,000 really isn't a lot of money. You got Trout baseball cards going in the millions. You've got, signed Black Lotuses going for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's not even counting, fine art pieces that are going for hundreds of millions of dollars. So you really need to take your own perspective into consideration when you're getting pissed off over things like this. So that individual who won the Cyberstein, paid it, and now owns it, finds it so hysterical that all of you are getting so bent up out of shape over it and how much publicity this card has been getting, that he's doubling down and trying to buy more now at that same price point. Not only that, but there are multiple people who wanted to buy that card at, $8,000 plus, myself included, to the point where there was a few people that got extremely upset that they didn't win the card and that anyone would pay more than what they figured the card was worth. So, one thing you should all realize as well is that for the card to actually sell for $10,000, that means there had to have been at least two individuals to bid it that high. If the guy who won the card had only bid $10,000 and the next highest bid was $5,000, the card would have actually sold for $5,000. However, it didn't. There was two people who bid $10,000 approximately, and as well, someone else tried to buy the card after the fact if the person who won the auction didn't pay. So that is the way it is with Cyberstein. I think that the next sale of the card is probably going to go for around the same, depending on the grade and condition and all those things withstanding. However, there is now a Becca 10 copy going up on auction in the next few days. Granted, it's a weak Beckett 10. Everyone's really pissed off about the centering of that card. I expect that one to end somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000. I don't know if it would hit 25. It depends on how many more people, from the Magic community and, scumbag investor type of people decide to get in on the action. I really won't be surprised if it hits 20. I can conceive it hitting up to 25,000. So that is what it is. Like it or lump it, it's the way that the market's working right now. So to give you an example, I sold my own Royal Command from Labyrinth of Nightmare, first edition ultra rare, because I had a few copies on the way. I figured, oh, well, I need a few more cards for my own auction a couple months ago, and I wasn't going to need multiple copies because, I was counting my chickens before they hatched out of the egg, and lo and behold, none of those were gradable in 10, so I had to buy the next one that came up for sale, which was this copy, that came up at auction a few weeks ago, and I ended up paying about 2 or 3 times what my copy had sold for just, 4 weeks prior. So instead of getting bent out of shape and screaming, oh, well, mine just sold a few weeks ago for less than half of that, so the card's not worth that, and screaming on Instagram and Reddit and Facebook, I sucked it up and bought the damn card because it's only going to keep going up. And the concept of perspective, especially in the trading card community, is kind of laughable at this point because no one really sees to think past their own nose for some reason. People are only looking at the immediate short term of the last few weeks or months, or the immediate future term of a few weeks or months, when anyone in any other collectible hobby looks at things in, generally years, sometimes decades. So for an actual financial investment perspective, you need to be looking at, minimum 5 years, typically, on an investment of any type of that sort before, people start talking about selling or anything like that. That flipper culture doesn't really exist when it comes to other hobbies. So keep that in mind. That brings me to my next point, that traditionally Yu-Gi-Oh! Collectors and investors are much younger than your Pokemon, Magic, sports cards people because of when the game came out. So the game and TV show and all that jazz came out 2-3 years after Pokemon. So Pokemon has that head start over, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Collectors when it comes to life, because they started, they were physically born earlier than a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Guys out there, who are generally in their 20s, early 30s, like myself. I grew up with Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'm, a bit of a hybrid or whatever the hell you want to call me. So those individuals in Pokemon, because they're older, they got started at their, full-time big boy, big girl jobs a bit earlier. And as a result, they're making more money than people who are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic is 10 years older than Yu-Gi-Oh! So the people in Magic have even more money, again, than even the Pokemon people. And, sports cards collecting has been around for over 100 years. And generally, those type of collectors have a shitload more money than any of the Magic people. And then you have fine arts collectors that have been around for, centuries, who have shitload more money again than the sports cards people. So you really need to take into perspective where something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is still really nascent and, has only been around 20 years compared to something like baseball. It's been around for over, 100 years, pushing 150 years, and fine arts, hundreds of years. So just because you think that a piece of Cyberstein cardboard is not worth $10,000, $10,000 really doesn't mean jack shit in the grand scheme of things, and is most likely going to keep going up and climbing. I will give you an example of the first edition wavy Blue Eyes White Dragon from LOB. when I got back into the hobby a few years ago, you know, seriously actually collecting and investing, that card was $2,000 and a PSA 10. And I looked at that when Geezy bought his copy. I said, that is stupid. Why the hell would anyone in their right mind pay $2,000 for a piece of cardboard? You're an idiot, Geezy. You are never going to own a house. You're going to live in poverty for the rest of your life. And, you know, 2 short years later, I'm paying more than 10 times what he did for his card. So, it's all about perspective when it comes to things like this. Just because you think a, you know, sale of a particular card or item is overvalued at a specific moment in time doesn't mean in 6 months, a year, you know, 5 years from now, you're not going to be looking back at that exact same item at the exact same price and say that, oh shit, well, that was a deal. I should have bought that then. Because generally, with commodities, you know, over time, you're going to have your peaks and your valleys and your ups and downs, but over time, the market is going to steadily increase. And people need to realize that regardless of what you think, or, you know, if you're fed up with all this price humping bullshit and you're going to sell off your collection, not getting into it anymore, generally the market doesn't care and it's going to move on without you. And if you can't realize that and come to terms with it, then unfortunately you're going to be left behind. And a lot of these cards that have been available for, you know, years or decades and were extremely price stagnant, like Cyberstein was stuck at the $2,000 to $3,000 range since I came back into the hobby. That card hardly moved at all. That card is way overdue for a price jump. And if you can't realize that and come to terms with that, then unfortunately you're never going to own these types of cards because, like I said, they're just going to keep going up in price. And as more people come into the hobby from other hobbies, or, you know, are more established in their lives and careers and have more disposable income to spend, then you're not going to be able to get the cards you want, because as all these extra people come in, it's going to be driving the market up even higher, and it's going to make these things like Cyberstein even scarcer to get, because as you get that collector who, you know, is buying for the sake of collecting, they're not going to be readily willing or, you know, able to sell their collectibles. And in the case of something like Cyberstein, where there's only like 100, 130 copies, every time one of those gets put away in a deep, dark bank vault somewhere, that's one less that's available to purchase, which means it's going to be even harder to get the next subsequent copy. And I'm personally sitting on 3 copies of the card. I'm not planning on selling any of them anytime soon. So basically, if you want a card, you're going to have to suck it up and buy it, unfortunately. The prices might come back down a bit. I'm not disputing that. The next sale might only go for $8,000 or $9,000. Like I said, though, the next one is going to be a big boy, big girl sale. With that back at 10, I honestly think that's going to go for about $20,000. I won't be surprised if it hits, you know, up to 25. So it is what it is. If you want to bitch at me, hit me up on Instagram at Petaparty. And if you've got any other questions or comments, do it there. So have a good one.